Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another edition of Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. Oh boy, this is an exciting episode for me. This is a nostalgic fever dream of an episode that I've been anticipating on doing ever since the creation of Movie Goodness, and I just cannot put into words how excited I am to have this opportunity to talk about something that I grew up loving. I guess putting it into words is the wrong expression, being as though this is a podcast. So putting into words is my one and only job here today. But I'm going to attempt to. And what we're discussing today, in case you didn't look at the thumbnail or the title of this episode, we're going to talk about Transformers. And we're doing it different. I'm not going to go through the whole Michael Bay Transformer film franchise. I'm just going to focus on when I grew up in the 80s. I'm an 80s kid. And so watching the animated series, watching the movie, having the toys, just the excitement when the Michael Bay live action film came out in what that was 2007, I think it was. It was just little Kevin Reed, little 6 7 year old Kevin Reed, just bursting out of myself, out of my grown self, who was married with two children at the time. At the time, but I am super excited to talk about Transformers, and we're doing this episode today in honor of the new release, Transformers Rise of the Beast, which drops in theaters this Friday, June the 9th. And so I said, hey, we're going to make this more than meets the eye today. We're going back in time where it all started. And the reason I'm not going through the Michael Bay movies, I'll save that for another show because I didn't. Well, for two reasons, honestly. One, I didn't want to go through watching all of those films over again. I didn't want to do that for the show. Actually, I didn't have time. I don't have time to watch all those movies over, and some of those movies, if not most, are not in my top tier of films that I wanted to put myself through. And the other reason is we talk about Transformers as of late, and quite honestly, we never really go back. We never take the time and remember where things come from, where it's all started. And for me, it all started in 1984. And I think this is part of the problem with our youth today. Hey, I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second here before we get into the show. One of the problems that our youth are having, aside from all the other foolishness going on in the world, unlike our generation, and I say our for those of us who are of a certain age, uh, I remember waking up on Saturday mornings, watching cartoons, coming home from school and watching the afternoon cartoons and stuff like that. It made your imagination work. You had fun with that. You was excited to go home and watch Transformers or He-Man or G.I. Joe, all those cartoons that used to come on in the 80s. And now what cartoons? You got Cartoon Network, but it's not the same. It doesn't have that same feel, and you don't have Saturday morning cartoons like you used to have. And it's just ridiculous if you ask me. For these kids, I mean, it's no fun. There's no fun. Everything is electronic. Every kid has an iPhone, has an iPad, has PlayStation, has Xbox, has all this other stuff. But there's no other imagination going on. And I'm saying all this as a father. who children had all the stuff I just listed. you know, I gave them all that, and it's, I guess I'm part of the problem because honestly, we ain't. I'm not part of the problem, and no other parent is, because it's not our fault that these networks decided, it costs too much money to produce these animated TV shows. So we're just gonna put on infomercials and all this other stupid stuff, reality TV and all this other stuff. These kids don't have that same joy. It was joy watching this, man. It was just something about it. It was something about this era of growing up in the 80s. And Transformers for me was one of those things, it was something about it. It was just something special about it. That's why the movies took off the way they did. Everybody was excited for that because everybody wanted to see that, in live action. I used to dream of growing up, because I always dreamed of being a filmmaker. And one of my biggest goals was to make a live action Transformers movie. Uh, Steven Spielberg and Michael Bay beat me to the punch. So, there's still hope for Voltron, though. That was one of my other ones. So I I wanted to see a live action, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, how would you pull that off? How would you pull it off? And I would say for the most part, especially in that first one, they pulled it off pretty well. Like I said, I'm not going to dive into those films too much. So going back into the 80s here with the animated show. Now, back then, not so much back then, actually now too, most cartoons or animated series are based around toys. It's all about the toy sales, because that was a 30-minute commercial in a sense. You see the cartoon, and now you want the toy. Like you wanted GI Joes because you watched GI Joe. You wanted He-Man and Masters of the Universe and the Castle Grayskull and all this other stuff because you watched it on television. And I remember having the Optimus Prime actual toy, the one, and it had the tractor trailer attached to it. That was a base when you when you unfolded it was. Oh my god, I love that thing. I wish I still had it. I wish I had all my toys that I had back in the day. I don't know what I did. Of course, I was kind of destructive with my toys. My imagination went crazy when it came to all those toys, and you know throwing them off top of the house and stuff like that. It was good times, but now I regret it because I still want to play with them. This 40-something-year-old man still wants to play with toys. Yes, it's a fact. If Toys R Us was around right now, I'll probably be in there right now. But I digress. But I want to go back. I want to go back to the year 1984 and talk about how the Transformers came to be. And for our film today, as I said before, we're not going to dive into the Michael Bay live action films. Since we're staying in the 80s with the animated series and the toys and everything that we're going to discuss, we're going to stay in the 80s. The year 1986, with the release of The Transformers, the movie, which came out in theaters, and we're going to review that today. And we're going to take a trip down memory lane with that film with me, because I did go to the theater to see that film. I begged my dad to bring me, and he did. And it was a mistake. And I'll let you know why when we get to the review. But let's talk about the Transformers. In case you don't know what Transformers are, what the plot of the Transformers series was. It was a series focused on Transformers, split into two warring factions: the heroic Autobots and the evil Decepticons, as they crash land on Earth and continue their long conflict here. Um, this was a mind-bending show. This is back when animation was just top tier. No disrespect to the animation films and shows that are coming out now. I know a lot of work goes into it, and so I'm not poo-pooing on them, but it was just something about the quality of the animation back in the early 80s, even into the 90s. When you think about X-Men animated series and Batman animated series and stuff like that, it, something about that animation that just felt real. You know what I'm saying? It felt right. It just felt right. And this was a TV show that originally aired from September 17th, 1984 to November the 11th, 1986. I'm sorry, 87, in syndication based upon Hasbro's Transformers toy line. The first television series in the Transformers franchise, it depicts a war between giant robots that can transform into vehicles and other objects. And this was the big thing with the Transformers that made it just a unique and exciting show, toy line, concept altogether. You have these robots and they can transform into a car or transform into a truck or transform into a jet and transform into a blaster, a cannon and things like that. And then the toys did that. And it was like, my God, man, this is awesome. It was 100 moving pieces on this toy. You would go nuts with it. And it was just amazing. The detail that went into those toys. It, I still can't wrap my head around it, and it's been 40 years since I last picked up a Transformers toy, but it still amazes me. As far as the animated series is concerned, it was produced by Marvel Productions and Sunbow Productions in association with Japanese studio, and I hope I say the name right, Toei Animation for first run syndication. Toei co-produced the show and was the main animation studio for the first two seasons. In the third season, Toei's involvement with the production team was reduced and the animation service was shared with South Korean studio AKOM. The show's supervising producer was also AKOM's founder. The fourth season was entirely animated by AKOM. And I'm saying AKOM because it's in all caps, so I'm assuming is an acronym. So it could be ACOM. I don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and spell it. The series was supplemented into a feature film, The Transformers, the movie, in 1986, which is the film that we're going to review a little later, taking place between the second and third seasons. The series was also popularly known as Generation 1, a term originally coined by fans in response to the rebranding of the franchise as Transformers Generation 2 in 1992, which eventually made its way into official use. The series was later shown in reruns on the Sci Fi Channel and the Hub Discovery Family. Just to give you a little background, the Transformers toy line and animated series was inspired by the Japanese toy line Microman, a Eastern descendant of the 12-inch G.I. Joe action figure. In 1980, the Microman spin-off Diaclone was released, featuring inch-tall humanoid figures able to sit in the driver's seat of a scale model vehicle, which could transform into humanoid robot bodies the drivers piloting. Later, still in 1983, a Microman subline, Microchange, was introduced, featuring actual size items that transformed into robots, such as microcassettes, guns, and toy cars. Yes, in the 80s, we used to have toy guns. And yet kids weren't running around shooting everybody. But I digress. We move on. Diaclone and Microchain toys were discovered at the 1983 Tokyo Toy Fair by Hasbro Toy Company. It was decided by Hasbro to release toys from both Diaclone and Microchange as one toy line for their markets. Although there were some eventual changes to the color schemes from the original toy to match the new series. By 1984, U.S. regulators had removed many of the restrictions regarding the placement of promotional content within children's television programs. The way was cleared for the new product based television program. Hasbro had previously worked with Marvel Comics to develop G.I. Joe, a real American hero, for a three-pronged marketing scheme: the toy line, a tie-in comic book by Marvel, and an animated miniseries produced by Marvel's media arm, Marvel Productions. Given the success of that strategy, the process repeated in 1984 when Hasbro marketing vice president approached Marvel to develop their new robot series dubbed Transformers. Marvel's editor in chief at the time, Jim Shooter, produced a rough story concept for the series, creating the idea of the two warring factions of alien robots, the, the heroic Autobots and the evil Decepticons. To flush out his concept, Shooter called upon veteran editor Dennis O'Neil to create character names and profiles for the cast. But O'Neil's work did not meet with not Marvel's, Hasbro's expectations, and they requested heavy revisions. O'Neil declined to make said revisions, and the project was turned down by several writers and editors approached by Shooter until editor Bob Budinsky, I'm pretty sure I butchered his name, accepted the task, hastily performing the revisions within a weekend. New names and profiles were a hit with Hasbro, and production began on a bi-monthly 4-issue comic book miniseries and a 3-part television pilot. Both comic and cartoon would wind up continuing for years beyond its short-term beginnings, using the original development works as a springboard to tell the story of the Transformers in very different ways from one way to another. Let's go through the main characters of the Transformers. As I said before, Autobots, good guys. Decepticon, bad. You should know that by the name. But which is stated, I thought that was a funny line from Bumblebee, the movie that came out with John Cena and Haley Steinfeld. He said, "Are we really gonna trust these guys? They're called Decepticons. Their their name literally means evil." It was just a funny line to put in there. But anywho's, let's go through the characters, and I'm gonna give a little bio on each character as well. Um, Optimus Prime. Optimus Prime is the strongest and most courageous of all the Autobots. He is also the leader of the Autobots. Feels his role is the protection of all life, including human life, all life on Earth. Optimus Prime transforms into a 1984 Freightliner, which is the coolest design you can ever have for for that for that particular character. That's one of my knocks about the Bay movies. And I said I weren't gonna talk about the Bay movies, but I've been bringing them up about 6 times already through this show. But I couldn't stand the design of Optimus Prime. I liked it, but I wanted the old Gen 1 Optimus Prime. And I think this new Transformers is going back to the G1. But anywho's, yes, that's Optimus Prime. He has been killed numerous times throughout the franchise. Numerous. And we're going to get to one of the main ones a little later on that just destroyed me. But he's always come back. But Optimus Prime, one of my favorites of the Transformers. Bumblebee. Bumblebee is a small, eager, and brave Autobot. Bumblebee acts as a messenger, a scout, and a spy. Due to his small size, he dares to go where others cannot and will not. He idolizes the bigger Autobots, especially Optimus Prime. Um, he is the most energetic of the Autobots. He has the best vision of all the Autobots. He can go underwater. Although physically he's the weakest, his stealth methods were second to none. Bumblebee transforms into a 1970s Volkswagen Beetle, and it's that was another thing that well, the whole Bumblebee character changed in the Michael Bay films. I guess I'm gonna stop saying I'm not gonna talk about Michael Bay movies because I have no other reference that maybe y'all will understand. Um, but uh, Bumblebee in the Michael Bay films is nothing like the Bumblebee from the cartoons. Nothing. I'm not mad at it. I mean, he was cold. I liked him. He's probably one of my favorites from the Michael Bay films. The Bumblebee character, but he didn't talk. It just didn't. I don't know why they made that dramatic change of that character. Oh, I wanted to say who voiced all these characters as well. Um, for Optimus Prime, of course, the legend Peter Cullen voices Optimus Prime. Uh, at least in the animated, as well as the live action as well. But we're just going to focus on the animated. Bumblebee in animation, he is voiced by Dan Genzel. Pretty sure I'm butchering his name. No disrespect. Uh, Moving on to Cliff Jumper. Cliff Jumper. I loved Cliff Jumper because he was cocky with it. You know, Jumper, who is voiced by Casey Kasem. He had a catchphrase, "Let me at him." You know, that was his catchphrase, boy. He was eager, daring. He had no equal. He is driven by the desire to win the battle against the Decepticons. He finds, uh, he always found Earth just, I don't, like, horrendous. That's the only way I can describe it. He just did not like being on Earth. He's one of the fastest of the Autobots. Often used his speed to draw gunfire away from the others, but his recklessness often led to blow-ups in situations too dangerous for him to handle. Cliff Jumper transformed into a 1980 Porsche, which makes sense being as though he's one of the fastest of the Autobots. Wheeljack. Wheeljack was voiced by Christopher Collins, and Wheeljack was the mad scientist of the Autobots. He always invented new weapons and gadgets, most apt at driving while in car mode. Uh, he liked to show off his stunts. Um, he had a firing range of 800 miles. He would shoot magnetic inducers, and he was his own worst enemy. Actually, often injured while experimenting on new weapons. Uh, he was just something else, man. Wheeljack was a mess. He transformed into a 1976 Turbo. Um, Wheeljack was just, I don't know how to describe it, but he's another one who died. He actually died in Transformers the movie, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he got the business in that movie. But we'll get to that later on. Jazz, I love Jazz. Jazz was voiced by Scatman Crothers. Jazz loved the Earth culture. He always looked to learn more. His knowledge of Earth made him the right hand man of Optimus Prime. Um, he takes the most dangerous missions. He was stylish. He was cool. He was competent. He was equipped with photon rifles, a flamethrower. Uh, I mean, what else, man? He calls dizziness and disorientation with his, the sound and the light show. He was just clever. I always loved Jazz, and Jazz transformed into a 1976 Porsche as well. And Jazz, this was another one I was upset with the Bay films because they killed Jazz in the first one. I mean, uh, Megatron just ripped him apart, ripped him in two like he was nothing. And I felt that was disrespectful, man. I did not like it. I did not like that in that film. It really, really perturbed me. But whatever. What's done is done. There's Prowl. Prowl, he was voiced by Michael Bell. Prowl will keep at a task as long as it takes. He strives to find reason and logic in everything. He was a listener. He wasn't really a talker. Uh, he was the one with the, I guess, always gravitated to logic when it came to the Autobots. He was able to analyze and advise on complicated missions. You know, the unexpected can often scramble his circuits, though, being as though he was so singularly focused. And I think that did him in Transformers the movie because he died in Transformers the movie. Uh, Prowl transformed into a 1980 Nissan police car. Now let's move on to the Decepticons because there's the list of all of these characters would take up all the show. I could have did a whole show just talking about all the characters, but uh, moving on to the Decepticons, which are the enemy of the Autobots and the villains of this franchise. Their leader, Megatron, who is voiced by Frank Walker. Uh, Megatron combines brute strength, military experience, ruthlessness, and terror. He is incredibly powerful and intelligent. He can fire particle beams from his cannon. He can link interdimensionally to black holes and draw antimatter from it for use as a weapon. Megatron has no known weakness. He had no known weakness. He was also known as Galvatron after being injured in a fight with Optimus Prime. That happened in Transformers the movie. Now in certain series and seasons prior or after the release of the movie, uh, there have been instances where Megatron and Galvatron were separate entities. They were two different characters. And so that was interesting. That always confused me, but it is what it is. Megatron transformed into a Wilder P-38. He transformed into a weapon. Uh, like I said, it was no weakness to Megatron. He was the ultimate villain. Um, One of his right hand men, Soundwave, which also was voiced by Frank Walker. It is said that Soundwave can hear the Autobots leak, using everything he hears as blackmail to advance his status. He is an opportunist. He his sensors can detect even the lowest energy radio transmissions. He's able to read minds by monitoring electrical brain patterns. Uh, he acts as a radio link for others. He multiple times he was able to locate and identify Autobots, even informing Decepticons. He carried concussion blaster guns. He was just I couldn't stand Soundwave. I mean, I hated Soundwave guts, man, because he was the ultimate spy. You couldn't hide from Soundwave. Soundwave transformed into a micro cassette recorder, and for all of our younger listeners, probably don't even know what that is. Trust me, it was a very popular um form of listening back in the 80s. Shockwave. Shockwave, who was voiced by Corey Burton. He was cold, brutal, uh, loyal to Megatron. I mean, he was left in charge of Cybertron when Megatron left. Uh, he was like a carbon copy, if you will, of Megatron. He was to Megatron's billing, and Soundwave or Shockwave, should I say, was just a beast. Oh my god, man, that was one villain that actually I was like, man, what are they gonna do with him? Shockwave, he transformed into a laser pistol, and I mean, it was nothing you could do. It was honestly, God, I mean, he was. They had him in the Bay films, and they did him justice. He was a beast in the Bay films. I can honestly say that was pretty accurate. And last but not least, the one I wanted to talk about with the Decepticons is Starscream, who was voiced by Christopher Collins. Starscream, he was the one of all the Decepticons that I enjoyed the most because he always was looking at a way to backstab Megatron. He was always looking to replace Megatron as the leader, and he didn't care. But Megatron always fool. They say Megatron don't have a weakness, but it was Starscream because he never could see through it. I mean, he saw it, but it was like he let it go. It's like he felt that Starscream was no threat to him, even though Starscream he was ruthless, he was cold blooded, he was treacherous. Uh, he just considered himself the bee's knees, man, of the, of the Decepticons. Um, Starscream transformed into a 1975 F-15 Eagle jet, and I always enjoyed playing with that toy. He was something else, man. He's another one that got his issue in Transformers the movie. I'm gonna tell you, Transformers the movie was just uh, uh, I don't know how to describe it for for a 8 year old going to see this movie in the theater, but it was brutal. But anywho's, yeah, man, this those are just some of the characters in the Transformers, and I felt I had to introduce these characters before we went into the review. And that's exactly what we're going to do. In case you're not 100% engaged with Transformers, whether it's the old 80s animated series or the new films from Michael Bay and this new one coming up this weekend, Rise of the Beast, I just wanted to give you a slight introduction into this. And as I said before, the year was 1986. Uh, I'm 7 years old at the time. I'm a big fan of the cartoon. I own some of the toys, and this commercial came on. This trailer came on the television, and it was the movie to be released in theaters. And my jaw literally hit the floor. I'm like, oh my god, they made a movie? They made they actually made a movie? Oh my god, I gotta see it. But I can't drive myself. I don't have a job, so I can't pay for the ticket. So I only have limited options here. I think I asked my brother. That didn't go too well. I think he was working at the time. He didn't have time. I forgot what the reason was, or he just didn't want to bring me. I don't remember. But I asked my dad. Oh no, 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 no. I don't think I ever asked my brother. I think I straight up asked my dad. I just wanted to go see it with my dad, and I don't recall if I had to beg and plead too much, but I do know he brought me. And I even remember the theater that we went to go see it in because I only seen two movies in this theater in my whole life. It's not there any longer. It's the well, the building is there, but not the theater. It's the Galleria. That's about 5 miles away from where I grew up, and we went to the Galleria because we saw this film, and I think either a year or two later, we went to go see Lethal Weapon 2. Yeah, I was 9 years old, 9 or 10 years old, and my dad took me to go see the Lethal Weapon 2. I wasn't mad at him. But I remember seeing those two movies at the Galleria. But this was the first film I went to go see there, and uh, we sat down to watch it, and my God, it tore me apart. The Transformers, the movie, which was released in 1986, is an animated science fiction action film based on the Transformers television series. This film was produced and directed by Nielsen Shang, who also produced the television series. The screenplay was written by Ron Fryman, who created Bionic 6 a year later. I remember Bionic 6. Um, pretty decent animated show. The film features the voices of Eric Idle, Judd Nelson, Leonard Nimoy, Casey Kasem, Robert Stack, Scatman Crothers, of course, Peter Cullen, Frank Walker, and Orson Welles. Yes, Orson Welles, Citizen Kane himself, and this was his final film. Orson Welles died 10 months before this film was released, and this was his final performance as he voiced Ultron, or Unicron, not Ultron. I'm thinking of the Avengers. Unicron. Um, man, man, let me tell you the story. This is the premise of it. Set in the near future, and this is the synopsis. So don't. I'm not going crazy, but this is the synopsis. Set in the near future in the year 2005. uh 20 years after the television second season, after a Decepticon assault devastated Autobot City, Optimus Prime wins a deadly one-on-one duel with Megatron, but ultimately sustains fatal injuries in the encounter. With Megatron gravely injured, the Decepticons are forced to retreat, saving the Autobots. The Autobots are hunted across the galaxy by Unicron, a planet-sized transformer intending to consume Cybertron, and who transfigures Megatron to become the enslaved Galvatron. I, I we sat down, and one of the main things that stuck out, the first thing that just blew my mind, this was the first time I sat in a theater and watched an animated, I don't care if it was TV show or film, and a curse word was in it. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I read this somewhere, or I saw something where this was reported, or I could have dreamt it up. But I think this was the first animated feature to have a F bomb, or was it the S? I think it was the S. I think it was, I can't remember. I know it was a curse word, and I'm sitting there like, oh, oh. And I thought my dad was going to pick me up and just say, no, we can't watch this and leave. Mind you, this is a man who just 2 years after this brought me to go see the heavily rated R Lethal Weapon 2 in the theaters, but that's neither here nor there. And also Action Jackson that same year, where I got to see Vanity's boobies, and he didn't budge. So we we went and watched it. But anywho, yeah, I was like, oh my God, they actually cursed, you know, messed me up. And I thought that was the worst we were going to get. No, no, sir. No, sir. About 10 minutes later into the film, mind you, we are only like 15 minutes into this movie. And then all of a sudden, we get the very first in known history WTF moment. Optimus Prime is fighting Megatron, and they're going at it. I mean, they are going at it like they've never done before on a television show. And I'm like, yeah, man, boy, if this is the beginning of the movie, boy, I can't wait to see what the rest of this movie is in store. All of a sudden, Optimus Prime gets shot in the chest. You're like, oh man, well, he'll shake it off. I mean, it's literally the beginning of the movie. And he dies. Optimus Prime dies. And I'm like, oh My God, it took me out of the movie for a little while, to be 100% honest with you. It took me out of it because I'm like, this is Optimus Prime. That's like going to see, what can I use as an example? Well, this had happened before. There's a movie that came out somewhere in the 90s, late 90s, with Kurt Russell and Bailey and Steven Seagal, called Executive Decision. And the movie was marketed as like a Steven Seagal film. You know, Steven Seagal died. Spoilers. He died. I mean, the movie about 30 years old, so get over. He dies like 30 minutes into the movie, and me and my cousin went to go see that in the theater. I'm like, what? wait, wait, this is a Steven Seagal movie, ain't it? I'm lost. But it actually was a Kurt Russell movie. But whatever, it blew my mind. But that didn't have the impact because who cares, Steven Seagal. But Optimus Prime, I just could not wrap my head around it. It took me forever. It took me so long to get over that. I mean, I'm still not over it mentally. I mean, this was trauma, man. This caused a lot of trauma, and not only in my life, but a lot of little boys and girls who went to go see this in 1986. Thank you, Hasbro, for just destroying people's childhoods before they had a chance to be a kid. But man, you want to talk about devastated? I'm like, man, are you kidding me? And so we move on with the story. This is when we get the great matrix of leadership thing. The matrix of leadership. He gave it to Ultra. Who was it? Ultra Magnus, who was voiced by Robert Stack, to light it in their darkest hour. When the Autobots needed the most, light it in the darkest hour. But only the leader, the true leader of the Autobots, can open this thing up. And so there was a scene later on when we get like the end of Act 2 or something like that, and Ultra Magnus tries to open it and he can't. He struggles with it, and at that same time you have Megatron, who was also wounded in that battle with Optimus Prime. I mean, he was tore up, man, and basically Starscream found that was his opportunity, that was his window, and so they they throw him out of the ship, and he's just wandering in space, and that's when he stumbles upon Unicron, and Unicron offers to spare his life or whatever if he be a minion for him. And so he transforms Megatron into Galvatron. And that was an awesome little scene, man. I still get the goosebumps when I watch that. I watched it recently for this show, and I was like, man, man, that is a fire little scene. And ultimately, he returns and exacts his revenge. He kills Starscream. There were so many deaths here. It was so it was a lot of deaths in this movie. I mean, I, I can't remember how much of an impact all of them had, because they kind of blew their load in the beginning of the film with Optimus Prime. Had Optimus Prime died later on in the film, I guess I could have felt the other ones more. But at that point, I'm like, I didn't care who died. you know, you killed Optimus. I mean, nothing's off the table at this point. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, people. I mean, Autobots started dropping like flies at this point, man. I mean, it was Devastation City, and it became their darkest hour. And this is when Hot Rod retrieved the matrix of leadership, and they're inside of Unicron. They're trying to take down Unicron from the inside out, and there's no hope at this point. Hot Rod opens the matrix with ease, which symbolized him as the true successor to Optimus Prime. And Hot Rod has a transformation, whereas he became Rodimus Prime. And man, you talking about a scene. And then you get that booming little heavy metal soundtrack in the background, you got the touch. It was all it was all there. And I was like, oh yeah, it was exciting to watch that. I still get pumped up by it. I got pumped up for it the other day when I was watching it. Yeah, I reverted back to my 7-year-old self. It was so awesome to see that. And they took down Unicron and saved Cybertron, and uh they rolled off into the sunset, still with no Optimus Prime. Which later on, I think Hasbro realized their mistake, uh, and they brought Optimus Prime back. I don't know if it was season 3 or 4. I think it was season 3. They brought him back on television and revived him, but they tried that same trick with the Michael Bay films with that god awful second one, Revenge of the Fallen, when they killed Optimus Prime. In that movie, they tried the exact same thing. Basically, they killed him in the first 30 minutes of the movie, or maybe the first hour of the movie. And at that point, you was like, "Who cares?" The movie was horrible, and killing Optimus Prime at that point, it was like it was really a mercy killing. But by the end of the film, they brought him back. Anywho's back to the Transformers, the movie. I really enjoyed this back in the day. This was my favorite Transformers film. Uh well, it was the only Transformers film. What am I talking about? But it was my favorite, I guess you could say, animated film around that era. I absolutely loved uh Transformers the movie. I bought it on VHS when it came out, or I got my dad to buy it for me. I bought it on DVD. I still own it on DVD, and it's just one of those movies, man. It just encapsulates my childhood, the joy of it, the trauma of it because if you grew up around that time, the big question was, where were you when Optimus Prime died? I was in the theater. I watched this in the theater, and it was opening weekend because I wasn't spoiled because there was no internet back then and all that. So, oh my God, just imagine if if Twitter was around in 1986. Boy, they would have spoiled that movie to death. Uh, Optimus died. I can't believe it would been trending on Twitter, RIP Optimus, and you're like, why are the people why is this trending? And but uh, yeah, it was better times back then. So going to the theater and seeing that, it was like, oh my God. uh but the movie, overall, if you can't tell, I completely enjoyed it. I love it for nostalgic reasons. But to be 100% honest with you, to keep it a buck, the movie's dated. It is dated in a lot of aspects. I mean, it's 1986. I'm not holding it, you know, putting his feet to the fire like, oh my God, it's unwatchable now. No, I'm not going that far, but it is kind of dated. Some of the material in there, it just doesn't translate well. Nothing offensive. It just it's boring in parts. I found myself bored in certain parts when I rewatched it. The Optimus Prime death was, I don't know. It was just a little too traumatic. To be honest with you, it really is, and I don't think they intended to just rip kids' hearts out around that time. But here I sit, 40 years later, still just traumatized by that event, man. I I hope it's just me. I hope it's not everybody else. I really do, because it tore me up. It still affects me to this day. When I rewatched it, I was like, man, this is stupid. Why did they do this? And for them to come back later on a television series and resurrect them, and they came out and said this, they made a mistake. They knew they made a mistake. And so I can't champion that decision in the film when the actual filmmakers and producers of the show and the movie have revealed that they made a mistake. And so for that reason, I gotta ding it. Transformers the movie, which came out in 1986, gets a letter grade of a C plus. It is a nostalgia trip that you can enjoy, but it's not the greatest thing on God's green earth. But I will say this: I would run and watch that before I watch 90% of the Michael Bay films. Uh, and I enjoyed a couple of. I enjoyed the first one. I enjoyed Dark of the Moon, but that's about it. It was about two of them. The rest of them I just accepted for what they were. But I would run to the Transformers the movie animated film before I would run to go see those films. So hopefully that'll change this weekend with Transformers Rise of the Beast, which actually looks pretty good. We're getting introduced to the Maximals, which I didn't go over because, like I said, we'll be here till next week going over all these characters. You know, you have Maximals, which are beasts, which later comes up on the show Transformers Beast Wars. You also have Constructicons, you have Dinobots, you have Junkatrons, which were in Transformers the movie. There are so many different kind of or groups of robots in disguise in this little franchise that it will blow your mind. But coming up in this film, in this new live action version, it looks like Unicron is making an appearance, going by the last trailer. I tried to stay away from the trailer. I don't want to know much of this story. I want to go in kind of blind and hopefully lower my expectations and enjoy it a little better, because I went into those other films with such high expectations and I was let down. And I think if I would have went in those films with the frame of mind I have right now, the it is what it is mind frame, I think it would have fared out better. But I'm hoping that this turns out good. I like all of those who are involved behind the camera, in front of the camera, the voice actors, all of that seems good. It looks beautiful in the trailer. I can't wait to see it on the big screen. Hopefully I'll get to see it in IMAX. And so I'm excited. But yes, the Transformers the movie, the animated film, gets a C plus. I still love it. Even though I have my problems with it, even though it's a little dated, I still love it, and I'll watch it over and over again because it just brings up so many memories from my childhood. But I would like to know from everybody listening, were you a Transformers fan growing up, or are you out the age bracket for this, or maybe you were born a little too late? You didn't grow up with it, but you grew up with the Michael Bay movies and you want to see this franchise move forward. I want to know, how did you feel about it? And especially for those who grew up in the 80s, I would love to know your fond memories of the Transformers. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look me up on Twitter at KB Radio Network, and on other social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. Don't forget about YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Look up the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Subscribe and like this video. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is you're currently listening to Movie Goodness, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, sharing the show. It's a big help, and I greatly appreciate it. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this special Transformers edition of Movie Goodness. It was truly more than meets the eye. I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love one another, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.